Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The mansion stood tall like a castle from a fairy tale, but for those who lived behind the polished tiles and glistening chandeliers, it was no fairy tale, especially not for the maids. Under the iron fist of Grace, John's elegant and famously stunning fiancée, the staff experienced quiet suffering daily. Grace had mastered the art of appearing regal in public, but vicious in private. She would descend from a staircase in her designer gowns like a goddess, but behind closed doors, her voice thundered like war drums. "You call this clean?" she barked at one of the older maids, flinging a silk cushion to the ground. "Redo the entire room. And the rest of you, don't stand like goats. Move." Mary, the youngest and poorest of all the maids, stood silently with a mop in her hand, too scared to even blink. Her eyes carried the burden of repeated humiliation. She barely understood half of what Grace yelled, but she had learned to interpret tones. And in Grace's voice there was never kindness. Mary's beauty was striking, smooth ebony skin that glowed even under harsh lighting, high cheekbones, wide soulful eyes, and long thick hair usually hidden under her worn scarf. But her English was broken, her sentences often disjointed, and her vocabulary limited. This, unfortunately, gave the other maids, who spoke a little better, license to mock her behind her back. Grace encouraged it. "Maybe next time, don't bring a market girl to my house," she once said to the head maid when Mary mistakenly poured water into a wine glass during dinner service. But Mary, despite the shame, kept her head low. Her mother had told her, "Hard work will speak when you don't have words." So she worked the hardest. She was up before the others and asleep after them. She washed, cleaned, and served, even when her body begged for rest. But her heart was growing weary. Kindness, it seemed, did not live in that house, and neither did justice. John, the billionaire whose wealth dripped from every surface in the house, was rarely around the staff. He left most of the domestic affairs to Grace. He believed her to be firm but fair, unaware that she ruled the house with cruelty disguised as authority. He would occasionally wave or nod at the maids, and Mary, who always smiled shyly back, kept her head down whenever he passed. To her, he was untouchable, a man from a world too far from her reach. She once saw him help a driver fix his stuck car at the gate and smiled to herself, believing that maybe, just maybe, he had a kind heart. But kindness wasn't what echoed through the hallways when Grace was present. What echoed was her voice, her laughter, her insults, and her contempt for anything that wasn't clothed in designer fabric or fluent in English. And at the center of it all, Mary endured, like a flame flickering in wind, refusing to die out. Grace had mastered deception the way an actress perfects her role. Every time John was around, she morphed into a doting, elegant woman, soft-spoken, graceful, and full of affection. She would meet him at the door, sometimes with a tray of food that she never cooked, offering it with a sweet smile and a voice dipped in honey. "I made this just for you," she'd say, brushing an invisible speck off his blazer. The moment he took a bite and turned away, she'd snap her fingers at the maids. "Clean this trash. And make sure none of you breathe near my man." The contrast between her public charm and private menace was like day and night. One time, Mary dropped a spoon while setting the dining table, and Grace flung a napkin at her face. "You're so useless. Even spoons are afraid of your hands," she hissed. But when John entered, she chuckled. "She's such a funny girl, always dropping things. But I like her, she's got energy." And Mary, still stinging from the insult, would smile faintly and bow, swallowing tears. The punishments were worse when John left for his business trips. Grace would walk into the kitchen in the middle of the day, inspect one cup, and declare that the whole house needed cleaning again. "Everything must be redone. Scrub the floors again. And if I see dust on the windowsills, you'll all sleep without food," she'd shout. And she meant it. On those days, the maids worked like machines, some even crying while mopping or scrubbing. Mary, despite always doing her best, got the worst of it. Once, she mistakenly addressed Grace as Auntie instead of Ma, and the entire kitchen went silent. Grace threw the cleaning rag at her and said, "Don't ever use that market mouth to address me again. You think we're mates." That night, Mary cried silently under her small blanket in the maid's quarters. Her only comfort was an old photograph of her mother, torn at the edges, tucked under her pillow. That, and the words she whispered to herself every night. "God, please don't let my heart break in this place." Among the staff, a hierarchy had formed, not of rank, but of mockery. The maids who spoke English better often gossiped about Mary behind her back. Even Cockroach Sabi Talkpasser once said once. Mary would hear them, but never respond. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to give them the satisfaction. She knew she was different. She didn't grow up in cities, didn't attend proper schools, and didn't have the clothes or words to fit in. But what she had was a heart that wouldn't quit, and hands that knew the rhythm of work. Still, every day became a test of endurance. She often wondered what she did to deserve the hatred, especially from a woman like Grace, who had everything. She tried her best to avoid trouble, but in that mansion, trouble had a face, and its name was Grace. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when Grace decided to host a tea party for her elite friends. Women draped in gold jewelry and conversations filled with gossip, laughter, and judgment. She instructed the maids to set up the garden with fine china, lace tablecloths, and a menu that none of them could pronounce. Mary was given the task of serving drinks and desserts, despite her fear of speaking English in front of strangers. She practiced silently behind the house, whispering words to herself, mispronouncing them, correcting herself, and praying she wouldn't embarrass John. The moment the guests arrived, Grace transformed again. "Ladies, welcome to our home," she said with a perfect accent. "My staff is simple but reliable." Then she called Mary forward with a wicked gleam in her eyes. "Come, diar. Tell them what's on the menu." Mary stood frozen, clutching the tray, her eyes wide. We have tea and cake and schnapberry," she stammered, trying to pronounce strawberry. Laughter erupted around the table. Grace laughed the loudest. "She means strawberry, girls. Isn't she just precious?" The other women covered their mouths, some recording discreetly on their phones. Mary's face flushed. She wanted the earth to open and swallow her. She mumbled an apology and backed away, spilling a bit of juice on the tray in her nervousness. Grace stood, snatched the tray from her hand, and hissed under her breath, "Get out, before you ruin the little class we have left here." Mary rushed behind the house and wept in silence, her hands shaking, her heart screaming. The sound of laughter still rang in her ears. John arrived home that evening and asked how the event went. Grace kissed his cheek and said, "Perfect, darling. Your Mary tried to entertain the ladies. She's got spirit." She said it with a laugh, but John noticed Mary didn't appear to serve him his evening drink as she usually did. Instead, she stayed in the servants' quarters, face down on her mat, whispering the words she tried to say earlier. Strawberry, not schnapberry. She held a torn piece of paper where she had scribbled words she wanted to learn. Despite the shame, she didn't give up. Not yet. Somewhere deep inside her, something had begun to stir. A silent resolve. A small voice saying, "You won't always be the one they laugh at." The garden was quiet that evening, its silence broken only by the soft rustle of trees and the distant sound of city traffic. Mary sat behind the flowering hibiscus shrubs, her knees hugged tightly to her chest. Her apron was still stained from the tea party disaster, and her scarf had slipped halfway off her head. She held her hands over her ears as if she could block out the mocking laughter still echoing in her memory. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her lips trembled with prayers she could barely utter. Why me?" she whispered in broken English. "I do nothing wrong." Every time she tried to do good, she was reminded of her lowly background. The shame clung to her like dirt she couldn't scrub off. Her dignity had been torn apart in front of strangers, and Grace, as always, made sure the wounds stayed fresh. Just then, soft footsteps approached from behind. She turned quickly, startled, ready to flee, but it was him. John. His crisp white shirt gleamed in the fading light, and his face was unreadable. though his eyes looked concerned. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, really looked at her, not as a maid or a servant, but as someone hurting. "Why are you crying?" he asked gently, crouching beside her. Mary quickly wiped her tears with her hands, stuttering. "No, nothing, sir, me I. Y no shera y." He chuckled softly and reached into his pocket, pulling out a clean handkerchief. Cry Maid always hiding tears like their secrets, he teased. The nickname wasn't cruel, it was soft, even warm. Mary looked at him, confused by his sudden tenderness. For a moment, she forgot her fear, her shame, everything. She took the handkerchief slowly, blinking back tears. "Thank you, sir." That night changed something. John, despite being a billionaire, had seen her, not as an object of pity, but as a person in pain. The next morning, he asked the head maid to give Mary lighter duties, and when questioned by Grace, he simply said, "She's been working the hardest. She deserves a break." Mary noticed that from then on, he often called her for tasks himself. He'd ask her to bring water or dust his office shelf, even if another maid was closer. She began seeing him in places she didn't expect, the kitchen, the hallway, near the garden. And every time they met, he'd say something teasing. Cry Maid, hope you're not crying over tea today, or don't go running behind flowers again, I might not always find you. Mary would blush and smile, hiding her teeth behind her hand. It was the first time in a long time she laughed with someone who didn't mock her. But Grace noticed, and the storm was brewing. It began slowly, like a whisper. The staff in the mansion started noticing the subtle shift. How Mr. John now paused a little longer when Mary spoke, how he laughed at her shy jokes, how he waited for her to pass by before entering a room. It was innocent at first. John even complimented her one morning after she mistakenly greeted him with, "Good morning, boss man, sir." He laughed and said, "I like that. I'll keep it as my title." The bond grew quietly but surely. Mary had no idea what was forming between them, but she noticed he listened when she spoke and smiled when she smiled. For the first time, someone of importance didn't look down on her. She still stumbled over her words, but with John, she didn't feel stupid, just human. One afternoon, while sitting in the garden with his laptop, John called Mary to bring him water. She arrived with a tray, her hands shaking slightly. He looked at her and asked, "Would you like to learn how to say sparkling water the fancy way?" Mary's face lit up. "Yes, sir. Me, I want to learn everything." He smiled and nodded. That evening, he made a call to a private tutor. The next week, she began taking secret English lessons in the evenings after work. The first few classes were rough. She struggled to pronounce words, cried when she couldn't write a full sentence, and nearly gave up. But each time, John would encourage her. "It's okay, cry Maid, even I failed English once in school," he joked. She didn't believe it, but it made her laugh. Slowly, her confidence began to bloom. Grace's suspicion turned into fury. One evening, she walked into the study and saw Mary handing John a folder. The way they smiled at each other made her blood boil. She stormed into the laundry room later that night, where Mary was folding towels, and slammed the basket down. "You think because he talks to you, you can act like queen," she snapped. Mary jumped, startled. I no understand," she said softly. Grace stepped closer. "Stay away from my man," she hissed. "This house may tolerate you, but I won't. I will destroy you if you try to touch what's mine." Mary's eyes widened, trembling in confusion. "Me? I no do anything. I just work." Grace raised her hand, but just then, a voice boomed from the door. "John." "What is going on here?" he asked. Grace quickly stepped back and forced a smile. "Just correcting the help," she lied. John looked at Mary, then back at Grace. "Next time you want to correct someone, don't raise your hand to do it." He turned and walked Mary out of the room, leaving Grace seething behind. Mary's lessons became more intense. She now carried a small notebook in her apron pocket, writing down new words every day. The tutor, a kind woman named Miss Ellahor, noticed Mary's hunger for knowledge and often stayed longer than paid for. "She learns with her heart," she once told John. Mary started to practice sentences with the other maids, though some still laughed when she got it wrong. But something in her had changed. She no longer cried as easily. She corrected herself, laughed at her own mistakes, and kept going. Grace saw it too. The maid, who once shrank at her feet, now held her shoulders a little straighter. She hated it. At night, when most of the mansion was asleep, John would sometimes find Mary reading out loud under the hallway light. He wouldn't interrupt. He would lean against the wall, listening to her try words like responsibility, compassion, independent. One night, he brought her tea instead of asking for it. "For the student of a year," he said. Mary nearly dropped her book in surprise. "Thank you, sir," she said, now clearer. He noticed. "Your English is getting better," he replied. She beamed, hiding her face. "I try small," she said. "You're doing more than trying," he replied. "You're changing." That night, Mary wrote something in her notebook. "Today, I felt proud of me." She underlined it twice. But the shadows never truly left. Grace began turning the other maids against Mary, threatening them with pay cuts if they talked to her. She called her names like Charity Case and the boss's project. She told them to spill dirty water near Mary's bed, to hide her books, and to sabotage her food. But Mary endured. She knew Grace wanted her to break, but she wouldn't, not this time. One afternoon, Mary caught Grace whispering to two maids and pointing at her. She didn't say anything. Instead, she smiled softly, picked up her bucket, and walked away. That night, as she finished studying, she whispered to herself, "They laugh because they don't know the stone they throw is the stone I will use to build." And from that moment on, her heart held one quiet promise. She would not be the same girl forever. It was a humid afternoon when tension finally exploded between Grace and Mary. The laundry room was hot and stuffy, filled with steam from freshly pressed clothes. Mary was alone, humming quietly as she folded John's shirts, the ones she always handled with care. She didn't hear Grace's heels approaching until it was too late. The door flung open violently, slamming against the wall. "So this is where you hide and flirt behind my back." Grace's voice was sharp, venomous. Mary looked up, startled, and instantly stepped back. "Ma, me, I no understand." But Grace was already charging toward her. She slapped the pile of towels from Mary's hands and grabbed her scarf. "Don't act like you don't know what you're doing," she spat. "You think because he lets you serve him water and giggle like a goat, you're something special?" Mary, shaken, tried to pick up the towels, whispering, "I no flirt, Ma. I only work." Grace wasn't satisfied. Her anger wasn't just about Mary. It was about control. And for the first time, that control felt like it was slipping. "You think this house is yours now? Just because he enrolled you in those pity classes? You'll never be anything but a maid," she barked. Then she leaned close and whispered, "I'll ruin you." Mary stood still, swallowing hard. Her hands trembled as she tried to find words, but her fear clouded her thoughts. Just then, the door creaked again, and John entered. He had come to look for a specific cufflink in the laundry basket, but instead, he saw Grace towering over Mary, the towels scattered across the floor, and Mary's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What's going on?" he demanded. Grace quickly stood upright, changing her tone. "Nothing. Just reminding her of her duties," she said sweetly. But John's eyes didn't miss the scene. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone was final. "Grace, if you ever raise your hand or voice at her again, I won't stay silent." Then he looked at Mary, gently touched her shoulder, and said, "Come." That moment left ripples. As Mary walked beside John out of the room, her feet shaky and her heart pounding, she realized something had shifted. He had defended her, not just out of sympathy, but with sincerity. And Grace, she had finally shown the depth of her jealousy. From that day, the air in the mansion thickened with tension. Grace began acting cold toward John too, answering him with curt nods or exaggerated silence. The other maids, sensing the drama, began to gossip quietly. Mary, though still scared, began to notice her heart feeling something new whenever John looked at her with those calm eyes. Something warm and terrifying. She didn't want to feel it. She wasn't meant to. But love doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives, uninvited and undeniable. Grace didn't sleep in her usual room that night. After John walked Mary out of the laundry room and gave her a quiet smile of comfort, Grace sat alone in her bedroom, seething. She didn't cry, she never did. Instead, she dialed her friends. "Let's go out," she said coldly. "I'm in the mood to make noise." Within an hour, she was dressed in a tight sequin dress, heels clicking like daggers, lips red as rage. She stepped past the maids without a word and walked straight to her car. "Tell John I'm out," she told the driver. "If he asks where I am, tell him to check the gutters. That's where he finds his type now." Her voice was soaked in disdain, and she didn't look back. The club was noisy, filled with people who didn't care about love or loyalty. She ordered drink after drink, surrounded by women who praised her curves and laughed at her jokes. But even in the music and lights, she couldn't forget John's face when he defended Mary. That moment kept flashing in her mind like a glitch she couldn't erase. Back at the mansion, John sat alone in his office, trying to focus on work, but failing. He had tried calling Grace, but she didn't answer. He left messages, polite ones at first, then more direct. "Can we talk? Please come back. I didn't mean to embarrass you." But her responses never came. Mary, unaware of what was unfolding, stayed in her corner of the quarters, reading her notebook by candlelight. She didn't want to think about the confrontation. She feared that John would grow distant now, regret defending her. She tried to focus on the words she was learning: respect, courage, worth. Ironically, those were the very things she had been denied for years. The silence of the mansion felt heavy. Staff tiptoed. No one dared speak above a whisper. When John finally stood from his desk to check if Grace had returned, he found her room empty. On the pillow was a note: "Go to hell with your maid. You deserve her." The words hit like a slap. John sank into the sofa in the hallway, the note trembling in his hand. He wasn't surprised by her anger, but he was stunned by the level of cruelty in her words. He thought of all the times he ignored the whispers of staff, the times he overlooked Mary's bruised dignity because he believed Grace's charm was genuine. But now it was undeniable. Her kindness had been a mask. And Mary? She, who had been kicked, mocked, slapped with words, never once spoke harshly to anyone. She worked, cried quietly, and still smiled the next morning. That night, John stood at the edge of his bedroom window and whispered to himself, "Maybe I've been blind, and maybe she was the only one who saw me clearly." The invitation came in a thick white envelope with gold lettering. It was a formal dinner party hosted by one of John's longtime business partners. Attendance was by invitation only, and each guest was to appear with a date. It wasn't just a social event. It was a symbol of public presence and private reputation. Grace would have been the obvious choice, the polished gem he'd always shown off. But now things were different. When John called her that morning, hoping for a truce, she picked up after letting it ring for nearly a minute. Her voice was cold. "What do you want?" He told her about the dinner, hoping it might be a step toward mending what was broken. Her laughter echoed through the phone. "Take your little maid," she said sharply. "Or maybe she can serve drinks in the ballroom while you pretend she belongs beside you." John didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The idea stirred in his mind for hours. He paced his office, staring at the invite, then out the window. Mary passed by once, carrying laundry. She didn't notice him watching. Her scarf was crooked, her hands were full, but she still smiled when she greeted another maid. There was something graceful about her that went beyond clothes or education, a kind of quiet dignity he hadn't seen in anyone else. After lunch, he called her. "Mary, can I talk to you for a moment?" She approached cautiously, wiping her palms on her skirt. "Yes, sir?" He hesitated. "There's an event. I was wondering if you'd come with me, as my guest." Her eyes widened instantly, as if he had asked her to fly. "Me? No, sir, no. I no fit go that kind place. People go laugh. Me, I no sabi speak well." She backed away. "I'm just house girl." But John didn't relent. "You're not just anything," he said firmly. "You're someone who has earned more than anyone else here. You work with your heart. That's what I need beside me." Mary shook her head, still uncertain. "I no have cloth. I no know how to do this thing." He smiled. "We'll take care of all that." The next morning, he made arrangements: a dress designer, a makeup artist, and a quiet seamstress from the staff to help her prepare. Mary sat in disbelief as her measurements were taken, as her feet were sized for shoes, as her hair was unwrapped and gently combed. She didn't recognize herself. Neither did the staff. Whispers began again, louder this time. "He's truly taking her," some said. "He must be crazy," others hissed. But one voice inside Mary whispered louder than all. "You're becoming the woman they said you could never be." Mary sat on the wooden stool in the corner of the wardrobe room, nervously fidgeting with the ends of her scarf. The very idea of attending a dinner party with John, the same John whose shoes she polished and whose shirts she folded, felt like a fairy tale wrapped in fear. She had never been to such an event. She didn't even know how to eat with a fork and knife properly, let alone speak fluently with billionaires and polished women in gowns. "Sir, a beg, I no go fit follow you," she said the first time John asked. "I no sabi that kind place. People go laugh me. I go shame you." But John didn't laugh. He knelt beside her like she was royalty and held her hand, something no one of his status had ever done. "Mary, I'm not asking for a show. I'm asking for you. You don't need to be anyone else but yourself." Still, she hesitated. Memories of laughter from the tea party, the scorn of other maids, and Grace's threats replayed in her mind like cruel echoes. "Dem go talk, sir. Dem go talk say Nami carry you comet from Madam Hand," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. John sighed and nodded slowly. "They'll always talk, Mary. They talked when I gave scholarships, when I donated to orphanages, and when I invested in tech startups. But I still did what was right." He paused, lifting her chin. "You're the only person in this house who has ever treated me like a person, not a prize or a wallet. That's rare. I'd be proud to stand beside you." The room was silent for a moment. Mary's throat tightened with emotion. She looked down, then up again. Her voice was barely a whisper. "If I go, promise you no leave me when dem laugh." That single question cracked something inside John. "I promise," he said firmly. "I'll be right there beside you." With tears threatening her eyes, Mary nodded. "Okay, sir. I go follow you." Word spread quickly through the house. The maids gossiped in hushed tones. Some laughed in disbelief. "Is she going to wear her mop as a gown?" one joked. Others were curious. "Maybe he just pities her." Mary kept to herself, unsure if she had made the right decision. But that evening, a seamstress arrived, followed by a soft-spoken makeup artist and a gentle hairstylist. They took her measurements, examined her hair, and began making preparations. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. Makeup tutorials, dress fittings, walking lessons. Mary stumbled a few times, but always got up with a shy smile. Each time, John watched quietly from a distance, smiling. He wasn't just transforming her appearance. He was unveiling the dignity that had always been buried beneath years of silence and suffering. The air in the mansion buzzed that evening. Outside, luxury cars began to arrive, ferrying some of the most influential people in the country to the dinner event. Inside, Mary stood in front of a tall mirror, barely able to recognize herself. Her hair was braided into a sleek crown, her dark skin glowed under soft foundation, and her eyes were lined with subtle gold shimmer. The gown she wore was a deep royal blue that clung softly to her waist and flowed down to her ankles with grace. It was the first time she'd worn anything new in her life. She turned around slowly, unable to believe the girl in the mirror was her. The scarf was gone, replaced with elegance. "I look like princess," she whispered to herself. Her voice, though still accented, was clearer now, stronger. The door opened gently. John entered, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo. He stopped at the threshold, his breath catching the moment he saw her. You look like a dream," he said, voice low. Mary turned, her hands trembling. "Sir, this cloth dey fear me," she whispered, looking down. John walked up to her and gently lifted her chin. "Don't be afraid. You wear it like you were born to." The two stood silently for a moment, the air between them thick with something unspoken. Then he extended his hand. "Shall we?" Mary nodded slowly, placing her hand in his. They walked out together, descending the stairs as the other staff watched in stunned silence. The same girl they used to mock, now walked beside a billionaire like she belonged there. At the event hall, all eyes turned the moment they entered. Flashing cameras, murmurs, whispers, it all filled the grand marble space. Mary's heart beat like a drum. She clung tightly to John's arm as they moved through the crowd. People whispered, "Who is she?" Others gawked. But one thing was clear, she was breathtaking. John never let go of her hand, not even for a second. He introduced her to people with pride. "This is Mary," he'd say. "My guest. My date." And then, in a moment that stunned the entire crowd, he took the stage during the brief dinner address. "I want to make an announcement," he said confidently. "I'm no longer with my former fiancée, and I'd like you all to meet someone who's reminded me what real love, real loyalty, and real peace feels like. Meet Mary, my girlfriend." The room fell into stunned silence, then scattered applause. Mary looked at him, shocked, her eyes wide. "You mean it?" she whispered. He smiled, pulling her closer. "I've never meant anything more." News traveled faster than fire on dry leaves. By the time John and Mary returned to the mansion, the internet was already ablaze with photos, headlines, and blog posts. Billionaire dumps fiancée Grace, introduces Maid as new girlfriend. From apron to Armani, meet the girl who stole a billionaire's heart. Mary sat in her tiny room, still in her blue gown, staring at the screen of a maid's phone in disbelief. She felt like someone had poured boiling water and ice on her at the same time. The attention was terrifying. The photos captured her beauty, her grace, and the disbelief in the eyes of some of the elite guests. But while the world talked, one person wasn't talking: Grace. When Grace saw the news, she was in a suite at a luxury hotel with her friends. The video of John's announcement played on a flat-screen TV, and her drink dropped from her hand. The glass shattered on the marble floor, but she didn't flinch. "He did what?" she whispered. Her friends went silent. Even they were in shock. One friend tried to console her, "Maybe it's temporary." But Grace's voice exploded. "He dumped me in front of the entire city for a housegirl." She stood, trembling, eyes bloodshot with rage. "She thinks this is over? I will finish her." That night, she called John over 10 times. He didn't pick up. She sent messages, voice notes laced with threats, insults, and pleas. "You'll regret this," one said. "She's trash. She doesn't belong in your world. She will humiliate you." John listened, but never responded. He turned off his phone and sat in the garden, watching Mary laugh softly with a few loyal staff who now looked at her differently, with respect. The next day, Grace showed up at the mansion unannounced. Security tried to block her, but she barged past them. She found Mary in the kitchen, tying her scarf, back in her normal clothes. "Enjoying the spotlight, housegirl," she hissed. Mary turned slowly, startled. I know Wanwala." Grace laughed darkly. "You already caused it." She stepped forward and whispered, "Let me give you one advice. Stay away from him, or I'll make sure they laugh at your bad English for the rest of your life. I'll make you go viral again for the wrong reasons." Mary stood frozen, too afraid to respond. But she didn't cry this time. Not yet. That evening, when John returned and found Mary sitting silently in the garden, her eyes lowered, he knew something was wrong. When she finally told him what happened, he stood and said one thing: "That's the last time she'll ever step into this house without permission." He meant it. Something had shifted. Grace had lost her crown, and she was determined to steal it back. But Mary was no longer the scared girl who hid behind her broken English. She was becoming something else. Something stronger. Grace didn't sleep that night. She paced her hotel room like a lioness locked in a cage, her mind boiling with humiliation. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, some from old friends pretending to check on her, others filled with gossip and mockery. "Is it true? Why would he choose her? How could you let a maid replace you?" She smashed one of her phones against the wall. Everything she had built with John, the image, the status, the lifestyle, was crumbling, and she blamed one person: Mary. She poured a glass of wine, stared at her reflection in the mirror, and whispered to herself, "She thinks she's won, but I'll show her what pain feels like." And so Grace began her war, not with fists or screams, but with secrets, shame, and sabotage. Her first attack came in the form of a text message. She created a fake account and sent Mary an edited video from the tea party, carefully cut to show Mary stuttering and spilling drinks, without any context. "This is who you are," the caption read. "Everyone is laughing." Mary opened the message while waiting for the tutor that morning. Her hands trembled as she watched the video. All the old fear came rushing back. For a moment, she felt like the girl they once mocked. But something was different now. She didn't cry. Instead, she saved the video and quietly put her phone away. When John saw her that evening and noticed her silence, he gently took her hand and said, "Talk to me." Mary showed him the message. John's face hardened. "She's scared," he said. "That's why she's trying to drag you down. But you're not who you were that day. And you never have to be again." The next day, Grace tried a more direct approach. She found one of the gossip blogs and sent them pictures of Mary's old, torn uniforms, claiming she had stolen the Billionaire by pretending to be innocent. She expected the blog to mock her, but instead it went viral with sympathy for Mary. From maid to girlfriend, the woman who won his heart with kindness became the new headline. Even strangers began to defend her online. Grace screamed into her pillow that night, realizing the world wasn't laughing at Mary anymore. They were admiring her. That truth cut deeper than any insult. Grace knew now the only way to win was to ruin Mary completely. But what she didn't realize was that each time she tried to break Mary, she made her stronger. The girl who once cried over broken grammar now stood calmly in front of cameras, holding John's hand, learning faster than anyone expected. And deep down, Grace could feel it. She was losing. Despite the whispers, the videos, and the online noise, Mary remained grounded. She still woke early, still prayed in her quiet corner, and still helped in the kitchen when no one was looking. She couldn't stop herself. She wasn't used to being served. She was used to serving. Even though John had told the maids to let her rest, she found peace in doing the little things. It reminded her of who she was before all this glamour, a girl raised on values, not vanity. One morning, John woke up and found a small bowl of pap and akara on the dining table with a note that read, "You said you miss Real breakfast. I make 'em small." He smiled, touched beyond words. It wasn't the food, it was the heart behind it. Grace had never once entered the kitchen in the years they dated. But Mary? She found joy in doing the things his ex considered beneath her. Their love grew like flowers in hard soil, slow but beautiful. John began to spend more time at home. He brought Mary books, helped her practice her pronunciation, and even walked with her in the garden late at night. "You know, I used to hate coming home," he once confessed. "But now this place feels like peace." Mary would smile, still shy, but her eyes glowed differently now. She was changing, not into someone else, but into the best version of herself. Yet even in love, she remained deeply humble. When the driver called her Madam, she laughed and said, "No be me be Madam, oh, I just a try." She still spoke pidgin often, even as her English improved. And John loved it. "Don't stop," he'd say. "It's you. It's honest." But not everyone appreciated her rise. Some staff members still mocked her behind closed doors, calling her maid girlfriend and Madam by mistake. She heard them, but chose not to respond. One afternoon, a wealthy visitor came to the mansion unannounced, one of John's business associates. He saw Mary in a simple gown helping the gardener arrange flower pots. Mistaking her for a servant, he asked her to fetch him water rudely. Mary paused, unsure what to do. Before she could answer, John walked in. "You're speaking to my girlfriend," he said firmly. The man chuckled awkwardly. "Oh, sorry, I thought she's exactly who I want beside me," John replied. Mary stood silently, heart pounding. That night, she cried, not because she was hurt, but because she was overwhelmed. "You dey defend me like say I be treasure," she said softly. John kissed her forehead and replied, "Because you are, and I won't let anyone treat you less than that again." For the first time in years, Mary believed it. Mary never adjusted to luxury, not fully. The soft bed, the shiny cutlery, the endless compliments, they all felt foreign. Like borrowed clothes she couldn't call her own. Despite now being referred to as a billionaire's girlfriend, she still helped set the dining table, swept the garden when no one was watching, and volunteered to run errands for the staff. She did it not to prove a point, but because it was who she had always been. Some staff admired her, slowly warming up. Others saw it as a weakness, still believing she was playing a long game. But John? He was falling deeper in love by the hour. One evening, he watched her kneel to tie the shoelaces of one of the younger guards who had injured his back. "She's not just kind, she's different," he whispered to himself. "She doesn't even know how rare she is." But humility has its weight. At a business brunch one weekend, Mary joined John at a small event meant only for close allies. The gathering was simple, but the people there weren't. Powerful investors, stylish women, and old money elites filled the hall. Mary wore a modest floral dress and kept her words minimal. One woman, elegant but cruel, turned to Mary during lunch and asked, "So what did you say you'd do again before becoming a girlfriend?" Mary, confused, replied, I work for house before. I clean." The woman smirked. Ah, how inspirational. The sarcasm in her voice sliced through the table. Mary lowered her gaze, suddenly self-conscious. John reached under the table and squeezed her hand. When the lady continued, John stood up. "We all came from somewhere, and I'd rather be with someone who knows the value of work than someone who only knows the value of wealth." The room fell silent. Mary blinked quickly, trying to fight back the tears. Later that night, Mary sat in her room alone. She had smiled through the event, nodded politely, and even laughed once or twice. But inside, she still carried the weight of not belonging. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "I no sabi this life. I be mistake for here." Just then, John knocked and entered gently. He sat beside her and listened as she opened up about her fears. "Dem go always see me as cleaner," she said, "no matter wetin I wear." John nodded. "Let them see what they want. I see you, and I know what you carry inside, grace, kindness, and strength. That's not something you buy in a store." He then reached into his drawer and pulled out a framed picture of them from the dinner party. "I keep this here because it reminds me who stood by me when the world turned its back." That night Mary didn't cry, but for the first time, she let herself believe she was becoming more than just a maid. She was becoming someone worthy of love, in her own skin. Grace was a woman undone. The world no longer knelt before her, and the man she once flaunted like a trophy now held another woman's hand in public, a maid. What stung even more was the respect Mary was beginning to command. Blogs that used to worship Grace now praised Mary's humility, calling her the queen of quiet grace, and the girlfriend who did what money couldn't. That drove Grace to desperation. She knew she couldn't win by looks anymore. She couldn't win by charm. But maybe, just maybe, she could win by dragging Mary back to the dirt she had once crawled from. One evening, Grace reached into her old cloud storage and found a file from the infamous tea party. The moment Mary fumbled her words in front of her friends. She spent hours editing it, cutting out every trace of laughter and context, and uploaded it anonymously to a gossip page. The caption read, "This is who he left Grace for. Watch her try to say strawberry." The video went viral within hours. People laughed. Memes were created. A few trolls made voiceovers. Some mocked her accent. Others said she sounded like a street hawker pretending to be a queen. Mary saw it the next morning during her English class. At first, she laughed nervously, thinking it was a mistake. But when she scrolled through the comments, her chest tightened. Words like bush girl, dirty maid, and village clown filled the screen. Miss Elahor, her tutor, noticed the change in her face and gently closed the laptop. "Don't read those," she said, but Mary's eyes had already turned glassy. "It no day finish," she murmured. "No matter how I try, dem go always see me as joke." She stood up quietly and walked out into the garden, where she sat under the orange tree and wept silently. The flowers didn't laugh. The wind didn't mock. Only nature seemed to understand her pain. John returned home late that evening and found Mary still in the garden, head resting on her knees. When he asked what happened, she didn't answer. She just handed him her phone and looked away. He watched the video silently. Then he scrolled through the comments. He didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was calm but tight. I should have protected you better. She looked up slowly. I really try to speak well. But my tongue no day roll like their own. Maybe I no belong for your side. John knelt before her. No, he said firmly. You belong not because of how you speak, but because of how you love. You don't fake smiles. You don't pretend. You're not perfect, and thank God for that, because neither am I. He then added, but if you let them stop you now, they win. And you are not the type that gives up. That night, Mary wiped her tears, opened her books, and began learning again, not to prove anything to the world, but to herself. 2 weeks later, John hosted a mini launch event for his company's new partnership. It was small compared to the grand dinner, but elite guests, media personnel, and key stakeholders were in attendance. He had decided to make it a relaxed affair, no suits, no long speeches. But as the day approached, something inside him said, let her speak. Let them hear her voice. He approached Mary and said softly, I want you to say something at the event. Just a few words. Her eyes widened. Me? Talk for microphone. She shook her head, terrified. No, I no fit. Dem go laugh again. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder. They laughed before because they were afraid, not of your English, but of your courage. She was quiet. The thought of standing before that kind of crowd again made her stomach twist. But she also knew she couldn't keep running from shame. She whispered, okay, I go try. The day of the event came. Mary wore a soft green ochre gown, simple but stunning. Her hair was braided neatly and tied in a bun. She stood beside John, her heart pounding in her chest. The hall was filled with quiet chatter, clinking glasses, and waiting eyes. When John introduced her as the woman who reminds me every day that loyalty is louder than luxury, applause followed. Then he handed her the microphone. Mary's hands trembled. She stepped forward, staring at a sea of faces. She swallowed hard and began, Good evening. My name is Mary. A few people chuckled, not mockingly, but gently. She paused. Her chest rose and fell. Then something shifted in her voice. When I first come here, I no fit talk like this. People laugh me. Dem call me name. But one man no laugh. He see me, even when I no see myself. So, I learn. I read. I try. And today I stand here not because I be big woman, but because love carry me come. The room was silent. Not a pin dropped. Her accent was still there, her English not perfect, but her words came from a place no grammar could replicate. People clapped. Some stood. John watched with tears in his eyes. In the crowd, a journalist who had once mocked her took out his phone and tweeted, She may not speak like them, but she speaks with truth. And that's more powerful. Grace, watching from her hotel room, stared at the screen in disbelief. Her final weapon, shame, had failed. Mary didn't just survive the ridicule, she turned it into a voice. A real one. That night, Mary sat beside John in the car, holding his hand. I feel small proud today, she said. He kissed her fingers gently. You should feel proud every day. She smiled, leaned on his shoulder, and whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me. And he whispered back, Thank you for teaching me how to love. John knew he had made his decision long ago, but watching Mary speak at the launch solidified everything. That night, while she slept peacefully in her small corner of the mansion, refusing to take the bigger room he had offered her, he sat on the balcony, staring at the stars and holding a tiny box. Inside it was a ring, delicate, silver, with a modest diamond set into a simple band. It wasn't flashy like the one he had bought for Grace years ago. That ring was for show. This one was for meaning. He planned to wait, to give Mary time, to make sure she was comfortable in her new world. But part of him didn't want to wait anymore. When love is right, he whispered to himself, you don't need the world's permission to move. He slid the ring into his coat pocket, ready for the right moment. The next morning, he took Mary for a walk around a quiet lakeside property he had recently acquired. It was peaceful, secluded, surrounded by nature. Mary wore a simple gown and flat sandals. She still walked with humility, still bent slightly when greeting the elderly gardener they passed. They reached a shaded spot with a bench, and John asked her to sit. "Do you like it here?" he asked. Mary smiled. "Ik quiet. I like am." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about us. About everything. I want to build something with you, not just this house or this life, but something deeper. But I don't want to rush you. I just want you to know, whenever you're ready, I'm here." Mary blinked, heart racing. She didn't speak, just nodded slowly, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't put into words. That evening, however, while John was out at a meeting, Grace attempted one last stunt. She showed up at the gate with a dramatic scene, screaming, pretending to faint, demanding to see John. The guards refused her entry. "You've been banned, madam," they said. "By Olga himself." Grace sat on the ground, makeup smeared, cameras from bloggers waiting outside. She screamed at Mary, who peered quietly from the upstairs balcony. "You think you've won? You think he loves you? You're just a project. When he gets tired, he'll drop you like he did me." Mary turned away, closed the curtain, and walked back into the room. She opened her English notebook and circled one word: resilience. Below it, she wrote in block letters, "I am not who I used to be." She didn't need to respond to Grace, because her life already had. The sun was soft that morning, not bright, not blinding, but warm, gentle, like peace had finally descended upon the mansion. Mary stood quietly at the far end of the garden, watering the hibiscus shrubs. It had become her ritual, not just to tend to the flowers, but to remember where her story had started. The same spot where she once sat crying alone, humiliated and broken. Now she stood taller, her shoulders no longer hunched by fear. She wore a modest, white dress, and her English notebook rested on the bench beside her. John walked in slowly from behind, hands in his pockets, watching her without interrupting. He had waited for the perfect moment, and now everything in his heart told him this was it. He stepped closer and called softly, "Cry, cry, Maid." She turned quickly, a smile breaking across her face. "You still they call me that name?" she asked, eyes teasing. "Always," he said, "because that's how I first saw your heart." He took her hand and led her to the bench, then pulled out a small velvet box from his coat. "Mary," he said, kneeling before her, "I don't care if the world still calls you a maid. I don't care if they mock your past, your accent, your hands, your background. Because I've seen you. You carried this house on your back, carried your shame with dignity, and turned it into strength. I fell in love with your spirit, and I don't want a future where you're not beside me." He opened the box, revealing the simple silver ring with a single diamond. "Will you marry me?" Mary froze. Her hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. For a few seconds she didn't speak. Then tears slipped down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the joy she never imagined could belong to her. "Yes," she whispered. "I go marry you." Then louder, "Yes, John, I go marry you." From the windows, the staff peeked through the curtains, gasping and whispering. Some clapped quietly. Others wiped tears. The gardener who once gave Mary extra drinking water whispered, "She deserves am." When John slipped the ring onto her finger, Mary looked at it like it was made of heaven. "This no be dream?" she asked. John laughed softly, pulling her into a hug. "It's not a dream. You're awake, Mary. And you're mine." News of their engagement spread like wildfire. Blogs posted headlines like, "From cleaning floors to wearing a diamond. The maid who became a fiancée." Grace, still sulking in silence, saw the news and didn't speak for hours. Her last words to her friend were, "He chose her. Not because of what she had, but because of who she was. And I never stood a chance." And for once in her life, she was right. The wedding was not grand in size, but it was grand in meaning. There were no large media crews, no politicians, no socialites vying for attention. Just close friends, loyal staff, and a few select guests who had stood by John during his toughest days. Mary wore a simple ivory lace gown, her hair wrapped in a beautifully tied gelly, her eyes lined with calm confidence. She walked down the aisle with her English tutor, Miss Ellahor, who smiled through tears. The staff cried openly. Even the gatekeeper wore his best shoes and clapped proudly as she passed. And John, in a deep gray suit, eyes shining with love, waited for her at the altar like he had waited his whole life. When Mary reached him, she whispered, "Not maybe the girl you wait for?" He chuckled, tears in his throat. "You are everything I never knew I needed." They exchanged vows under the shade of the same garden tree where their first real conversation began. Mary's English, though still tinged with accent, was clear, steady, and strong. "I know perfect," she said softly, voice trembling, "but I go love you like say you be all I get." "Because truly, you be all I get." John responded simply, "You've already given me more than money ever could." The applause was thunderous. They kissed as husband and wife, the same way they had once stood as maid and master, but now equal, bound by love and respect. No one could deny it anymore. The girl they had mocked had become the woman they now admired. After the ceremony, Mary was offered a glass of wine, but she declined. Instead, she poured juice for one of the elderly cleaners who had always been kind to her. "It's sweet to give," she said, smiling. And in that moment everyone saw it. She hadn't changed because of love. Love had simply revealed who she truly was. Grace, miles away, watched the wedding photos from a blog post on her phone. Sitting in a small hotel room she could no longer afford. Her friends had drifted. The spotlight was gone. All she had left were memories of pride, power, and the man who had once loved her, until her own arrogance pushed him away. She threw the phone aside and stared at the ceiling. "Maybe I had it all," she whispered, "and still lost." And that was her ending. Not death, not prison, but a slow, bitter realization. As for Mary, her ending was a beginning. She now stood in the mansion not as a maid, but as its queen, not because she fought to wear a crown, but because she proved worthy of one. And as she stood beside John that night, overlooking the garden lights and soft laughter of their celebration, she whispered to herself in soft, steady English, "I was never nothing. I was just waiting for someone to see me." And finally, someone did. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.